Okay, so welcome everyone. We're here today providing this webinar from NorCal Services for Deaf and Hard of Hearing for the DeafPlus Access to Advocacy program. Next slide. This project is sponsored by the California Department of Developmental Services, and this is a one-year project. My name is Diane Olafson, and I work at NorCal Services for Deaf and Hard of Hearing in the DeafPlus Access to Advocacy. I'm the coordinator of that program. And I'd like to introduce Stephen. Would you like to introduce yourself? Yes, my name is Stephen Ramirez. And I'm also a person that identifies as DeafPlus. And you have been a self-advocate for some time now. Yes, I am. It's wonderful to have you join the conversation today. Thank you. Next slide. I want to take a minute and describe a bit about the project and the services we provide to the DeafPlus community, the families and caretakers in the 24 Northern California counties. Our goal is overall to educate the DeafPlus community about their rights and the Lanterman Act. And we do this by the use of sign language. Also, another goal is to advocate for the communication needs of our DeafPlus community, as well as to empower DeafPlus individuals, their families and caregivers, to allow folks to advocate for their wants and needs and the supports and services they need. In today's webinar, we'll be discussing the definition of DeafPlus, as well as the Lanterman Act. We'll talk a bit about the regional centers, and then about the services and supports. We'll also discuss your rights, the complaint process, and self-advocacy and best practices there. Stephen, would you like to take this slide? Sure. Some of the terms that will be used today are DeafPlus, deaf and disabled, and all of those are all-inclusive terms. So what does DeafPlus mean? Diane asked. It's DeafPlus. Yes, it is a group of DeafPlus, but that means that it can be a deaf person, a hard of hearing person, or a deafblind person, as well as that person having an intellectual and or a developmental disability. So all of those things combined are what constitute a DeafPlus or deaf disabled person. And Stephen said, yes, that's right. Next slide. Stephen, you're a member, you participate in the regional centers, correct? He said, yes, I do. What are the requirements, or what are the eligible factors for a disabled person with an intellectual disability? They can have Stephen is saying they can have an intellectual disability, cerebral palsy, autism, epilepsy, or another disability. Diane saying, yes, intellectual disability includes all of those things. And they must have been diagnosed before the age of 18. So those factors also are combined with the next set, where the person must have a significant limitation within three or more of any of these categories, whether that be self-care, the ability to express or understand language, learning, mobility, capacity for independent living, economic self-sufficiency, and self-direction. And any of those factors combined make you eligible to be a member of the regional center. Next slide. So now I want to take a bit and share a video we have that you can watch and learn more about the Lanterman Act. And so we'll go ahead and show that video now.
Hello, my name is Neil. I am a DeafPlus person. DeafPlus means I am deaf and I have an additional disability. I am deaf plus cerebral palsy. There are deaf people in our community who have additional disabilities. For example, my friend Tom is deaf plus cerebral palsy. Or my friend Rebecca is deaf plus autistic. Or my friend Devin is deaf plus developmentally disabled. These are examples of the types of individuals, if diagnosed before 18, to be eligible for regional center services. This is why we use the terms deaf plus or deaf and disabled. In California, there is a law called the Lanterman Act that supports people like you and me. This law governs these services. This law says that we have the same rights as everyone. This means we can make choices in our own life and be active participants in our community. We can choose to be independent and/or interdependent, choose to be healthy, and to be safe. We have rights to support what we want and need to get services that are offered by local regional centers to achieve our personal goals that we ourselves decide. You can advocate for yourself in many different situations. We will show you some examples of how you can advocate for yourself. Everyone has the right to privacy. Everyone has the right to be valued and respected. We can choose. We can choose to share our things with others, or not. We can choose when other people want to visit. If someone tells you you can't do something, you can tell them that it's your right to do it, as long as it's within the law. I live with a roommate, and I have my own bedroom. There's a video phone for me to use when I want to talk with someone. I have my own key with a keychain. Here, you see, I have my keys. And I go out with friends, and I enjoy being with them. Sometimes I will go to the grocery store with a support person, and that's okay, but I choose what I want to eat and cook them for myself. And I share them with my roommate, if they want it. When I don't feel well, I ask my support person to make a doctor's appointment with me next to them. When I arrive, there's a hearing interpreter and a deaf interpreter. The doctor and I communicate with each other through them. Everyone has the right to see a doctor and to go to the hospital. Everyone has the right to have effective communication through interpreters. One day, I decided I wanted to go to a yoga class 3 times a week after school. I researched and found a yoga studio. It helps me feel better and stress-free after classes. I go home refreshed and focused to complete my homework. We have the right to do anything we want. You can decide to go to college, to practice another religion, or to learn a new hobby. You, only you, can make your own decisions. However, if you need support to help you make a decision, that's okay. But you, only you, make the final decision. If anyone tells you you can't, you will need to advocate and fight for yourself. In California, there are 21 local regional centers. At the regional center, there is a person who helps you by coordinating all the services you want and need. The person is called a service coordinator, or SC. When you and the service coordinator set up a meeting, it will be known as an individual program plan, or IPP meeting. The service coordinator will ask you what you want and need for your goals for the year. And then look at the services available in your location that will support you. You can invite anyone you wish to your IPP meeting. If you need an ASL interpreter and a deaf interpreter, you have the right to ask for both. Once the plan is set in place, those are the services you will receive for that year. If you do not like a service after you have started, you have the right to request a change in service and inform your service coordinator. If the service coordinator does not respond to your concerns, you can contact NorCal Services for Deaf and Hard of Hearing to ask for help to file a complaint or contact the Department of Developmental Services directly. We advocate for our rights, our choices, our support, and our services.
So the Lanterman Act itself, it's California law, and it's been in place since 1977. And the reason this law was put into place is for people with developmental disabilities and their families. That law has a book you can look at through dds.ca.gov, and that book basically, what it has in it, it will basically explain the Lanterman Act and what your rights are, and the regional centers, basically what services they provide, what kind of support they have, individual programs, and how to file a complaint, and also how to become an advocate. That is all included in that book. It's kind of cool to review that, and it'll give you more of a extended explanation of everything. So on to the next slide here. Stephen, if you want to go ahead and do this slide. Sure. So basically what your rights are to allow you what you to do and what you want, and basically the things that you are allowed to have. You have a right to have your own decision. You have a right to live in a house, live with roommates, or live with your parents. And you have the right to go to school or and go to work. You have the right to go to the communities, events and do stuff like that, get into groups and do things as that. You also have the right to go and have fun and see doctors and get care and make sure everything's good. There's nothing wrong, no issues. And Diane says, yes, those are your rights. So if people say, no, you can't go to school, or people say, no, you can't go to work, what do you do? And Stephen says, you have to allow me to do that. And if not, you're allowed to file a complaint. Diane said, yeah, you are allowed to file a complaint, but if the person wants to go to work and they say, no, you can't, you just got to stay home, you can't go to work, what are you going to do? Are you just going to say, fine, stay home, and that's okay? Or, and Steven says, no, I'm not going to stay home. I'm kind of be a little bit rebellious. I'm going to stand up, speak up for myself and say, I want to do this. I want to do it. And that's my right. It's my decision and it's my choice. Diane says, that's exactly right. It's very important. And you can let them know, that is my right. I'm supporting myself, because many times, people will try to let you know and say, you need a bunch of these prerequisites, you need this and that I want to do. And they'll say, no, 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 you can't. And they'll be kind of sad and let down. And, you can fight, and that's my right. It's very important to know that, we're the same as any other people, and people with disabilities or people with no disabilities, should have the same rights. And that's very important to know all of these things. Right, Stephen, you agree? Stephen says, yes, I do agree. Now, Diane says, if another person, how you have rights, and you see another deaf plus individual struggling, and, you talk with them, and Stephen says, my friend told me, no, can't go to the college. And Stephen, you try to explain to your friend, what would you explain to let them know what their rights are? Stephen would say, explain their rights to them and let them know that it's their choice. Diane says, well, how would you help them? And Steven says, how I would be able to help them is let them know that they could go to NorCal. They might be able to help you out as well. Diane says, I missed the last thing you said. Steven said NorCal could help me out as well. Diane said, yeah, that's true. Also, you can advocate and say, I'll come with you. I can help support you, and go with them and do things together. Steve says, yeah, I agree. I can go with them and, find job, help them get their job and all of that. Diane says, yes, it's very important to remember that the word right, the right, what that means is I have the right to choices. I have the right to make a decision. People telling me no, and you don't have to abide by that. So you also need to understand what's important is to make sure to follow the law, right? If you break the law, it might not sit well. So you kind of have to think about that. But in general, what your preferences and what your wants and what your needs are, go ahead. You can go through with that and with that process. So Stephen, I'm kind of curious, what do you prefer to do, for fun? Well, I like to go out to the movies. I really enjoy, I'm a movie freak. I like to go to the movies. I like to go to, get out, deaf people come out and go out, and they go to like a bar, so we do a little gathering there. Other places where deaf people end up going and socializing and hanging out. I also like doing hiking, or get on the BART, and I can basically, get around, do some traveling. I can use Google Maps on my phone and kind of look around and basically find out where I'm heading and figure out how I'm going to get there. Diane says, yeah, that sounds like fun. My friend likes doing the hiking as well. It's really beautiful when you go hiking. It's a lot of fun. And, maybe you guys want to join Stephen and go on a hike as well, if you'd like to do that as well. Yeah. So I'm curious, your health and safety, if you can explain what your vision is on that concept. Well, Stephen says, with health and safety, really, you got to have an interpreter with you to basically see doctors, or, if you're going to a counseling appointment, or your psychology appointment, psychiatrist appointment, you might want to get an interpreter, be there for support. And Diane says, yeah, it seems though as though you understand your rights for the Lanterman Act. If something pops up in your life and you're thinking, oh, okay, you got to remember these are my rights and you don't have to hold stuff in. You are allowed to make decisions. So we're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide now. So now if you look at this slide, it shows how many regional centers we have. And we have 21 regional centers all over California, from the north all the way to Southern California. So here, NorCal Services for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, we basically work with 3 agencies or regional centers. One is Far Northern Regional Center. And then the second one that we also do work with is Alta of California. And then the third one is Valley Mountain Regional Center. Those are the 3 agencies that we do work with. But if you look on the slide, you can see that you have DeafPlus can join any one of those regional centers to get support. Don't know if you're involved in any of those, Stephen. Stephen says, yes, I'm involved in some of those regional centers. Do you like the services that they provide so far? And Stephen says, yeah, I'm kind of new to some of the services, so it's going to take time to learn the processes. So what about the previous regional center? Stephen says, before Alta Services, it was great. So now, I moved and started getting a different service through a different regional center. So I'm kind of seeing how everything's working out. Hopefully it's better services. Just kind of looking forward to seeing how it goes. Diane says, good. All right, so we're going to go to the next slide. So the regional center, maybe you might know, Stephen knows, they have what's called the IPP, Individual Program Plan. Basically what that does is you can fill out basically, for example, first, the service coordinator, which abbreviated, it's kind of like a social worker. So the service coordinator, they basically will support, advocate, sit down with you, discuss your individualized program plan. And what they do is they'll ask you questions. What's your goals? Basically what services you provide, what you need, and you'll fill out your IPP. And I don't know if you've had experience with that, Stephen. Stephen says, yes, I've had experience with that many times every year. It's just once a year. They sometimes will do them every 3 months. It just depends on the client's preference. They could do it like monthly, every 2 months, 3 months, once a year. It's just really individualized on, your preferred time or days. Right. Diane says most of the time they'll set up like a goal of 6 months or like a year. They'll say, I want to basically work, on the goal for 6 months. And if you meet those goals, then we'll meet again at 6 months and try to add more goals from there on out. Is that correct, Stephen? Stephen agrees and says yes. So during the IPP meeting, everybody sits down and everybody gets together. Typically, the service coordinator will ask about the plan, the schedule, and get everything kind of documented and filled out. And typically the people that will show up to those will be the service coordinator, the DeafPlus consumer, and then as well as whoever wants to join. It could be a family, it could be staff, it could be somebody who's there and can support or advocate and knows that person. They can be there at that IPP meeting. So when you go in, you sit down, you have all those discussions of what the goals, what your wants and your needs are. So the service coordinator will basically take note and document everything that happens, what services and support is needed, fill all of that stuff out. And once the meeting is over and completed, they'll hand you the IPP and have a signature done. So Stephen says, yeah, so basically the signature is saying, yes, you agree in the IPP. We can go ahead and start with the process of getting that, done to complete, your goals. If that's not completed, we could keep that same plan and keep those goals. If those goals are met, then we can meet again and change or add stuff to the IPP. It's just up to your preference. And Diane says, yes, exactly. That's good. So if you don't want to sign the IPP, what happens? Steven says that means if you don't sign it, you're not in agreement with the IPP program plan, and you have to just kind of discuss it and come to an agreement. So Diane says if you don't want to sign it, you do have the right to not sign it. If you see there's mistakes or there's things that aren't added, you can basically revise that before you sign it. Now, when you sign it and give it back to the service coordinator, once those goals are met and everything like that, you can change those, or you can say, hey, let's meet again and say, I don't like those goals. I can take those goals off, change that. That is your right. You can continue to do that. And Steven says, yes, I'm in agreement. So Diane says, it's really important to know what I need, the things that are really important. Like you said before, it's important to have an interpreter. If you want an interpreter, to put that in the IPP plan. Correct, Stephen? Stephen says yes. All right, we're going to go ahead to the next slide and switching interpreters.
The IPP and your rights. Remember that it is your responsibility to make sure that all of the supports and services that you need are documented in that IPP, as well as establishing your goals. Stephen, what are some of the rights as you understand them? Well, it's my right to understand the IPP. It must be in language that's clear for me to understand. Also, it's my right to have an interpreter to make sure that communication is clear and that I understand the process. Also, I can ask to have a deaf interpreter. It's my choice whether it is an ASL English interpreter or a deaf interpreter. Some people can use their voice and speak. They use English, and some people use sign language, and some people use both. So at ARC, I also learned some people are still learning some sign. Diane says, well, yes, and the service coordinator needs to make sure that the meeting goes smoothly. And so they might have to pull in a sign language interpreter for their use as well to make sure that they understand and they can explain the document as clearly too. If you read through the document and you don't understand, the interpreter can oftentimes look at, or the service coordinator can read the document and then put it into sign language. That way you can understand if you agree or disagree with what's being stated. You don't want to just sign something without fully understanding it. It's important to make sure that you understand all of the points. So whether you see it signed to you or read it yourself, that is what we call understanding the document. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so were you all able to watch the video? And in review, Stephen, if you remember, what's the purpose of the Lanterman Act? Why was it established? The Lanterman Act is about your rights, and it lists what you can have of whatever you want in your rights. Yes, specifically for people with developmental disabilities. The Lanterman Act focuses on the rights that people with developmental disabilities have. It's a law that was passed here in California. Another part of the video talked about having an ASL interpreter and a deaf interpreter. What's the difference between an ASL English interpreter and a deaf interpreter? We can also call them hearing interpreters as opposed to deaf interpreters. What's the difference? Well, a hearing interpreter will interpret pretty easily. And a deaf interpreter is like a CDI. It's an interpreter that comes in and they take what another person is saying or what they have signed, and they can turn it into spoken language. The deaf interpreter copies what I sign. Yes, I just want to make sure that people understand that that person, sometimes folks sign really fast, and a deaf interpreter can moderate how they sign to make sure that they match the deaf person and their level of understanding the language. There are some additional things that the deaf interpreter can provide also. They can visually interpret into conceptual ways that the consumer can understand. Also, you talked before about your hobbies and the fun things you like, but things around your home, if there's staff or family, if you can't hold on to a key, they can hold it for you. If you want to go grocery shopping, is it okay if folks tell you no? Are those examples okay? No, those are not right. I can share food or share a house key. I should be able to have access to the house at any time I want, or get out of the house to go on errands or community activities. If I enjoy cooking, then I can cook for my family, for example. Sometimes we rotate in the family who cooks for the evening. That's really nice to share those responsibilities. Also, the key. Do you have one key that you share, or do you have your own key? Stephen says, nope, I've got my own key. It's my own. Every member of the family has their own key. Also, if a client wants to learn how to cook, is it okay to tell them no if they're not able to cook? But the client wants to learn how to cook. What should we do in that situation? Means the client should talk to the staff supervisor and tell them that the staff is not allowing them to cook. They will be reprimanded. And if they still refuse to teach the person how to cook, then they can switch out staff to make sure that the client has access. Right. They need to have access to learn whatever topics they're interested in. Also, if you are in, well, let's say you have a home, and then like you just said, if you're at school or work, if you have a preference over the two, do you like to go to college? I would rather work so I can earn money. And then I can go on fun outings and take care of things myself with that money. And what kind of work do you prefer? I would like to work with stocking in stores or food preparation. Also, I don't mind working in something to do with makeup. Oftentimes, some of those require a college degree, though. Also, I would love to work at a movie theater. I think that'd be great. I think deaf folks can definitely do the same things. I've had friends that have worked in movie theaters. It would be, DeafPlus people can do that. Absolutely. Right. And so say if you want a job, how would you go about getting a job? Well, I would tell my staff member that I want a job, and we would talk about it. Oh, I lost my train of thought. You mean you would talk to your service coordinator? Yes, my service coordinator. I would tell them, then they would help me out in looking for a job. And they would also provide, or at NorCal, they could provide help in looking for a job. Yeah, there's lots of jobs out there. And any one of those people can help you with the process in obtaining a job. So let's go back to the slide about the complaint process. It's important to remember when you first sign on to work with the regional center, you have the IPP. And if you disagree with the points in the IPP, then you don't have to sign it. So this complaint process is another form of if you disagree with what's happening, if you don't like what's happening at the regional center, their job is to support all of you within the DeafPlus community. And the IPP lists out all of the services and supports that you agree to. But if you don't agree with the regional center, maybe they decide to stop providing a specific service or support, or maybe they cut you off from the regional center altogether. Maybe if you want to establish a new goal, but they refuse. Or another way would be if you want to change something in the service plan, or possibly the service coordinator or the regional center in whole does not support your ideas, you are allowed to file a complaint. Stephen agrees. So filing a complaint means that you would fill out a form describing your complaint and then send that to the Department of Developmental Disabilities, where they would review it and they decide the process from there. Sometimes they call a meeting, sometimes they'll meet with the regional center. Sometimes they bring in a person to help mediate the situation and help solve the problems. Sometimes that process can look very formal, like it does in court, but the goal is to solve the issue. Oftentimes that can look like a really overwhelming process. So what would you do if you had to do that? I would ask a staff member to help me fill out the form. And then if they said no, then I would talk to their supervisor and explain that they're not helping me to fill out a form to file a complaint. This is Diane, okay? In that complaint process, it's very important to remember that what is the regional center's job? Well, their job is to advocate and to accommodate the needs of DeafPlus people. Yes, they must support the individual program plan. That's what lists out all of your needs and services, all of the supports that you have accepted and agreed to. So if there's anything on there that you're not satisfied with or not happy with, if you disagree, I just want to emphasize this point. Suppose the regional center stops the services and supports for you and cuts ties. That can really bring you down. It can be very depressing. Say that you want to establish a new goal, but the regional center does not allow that. Or if they change your plan and to something that you have not yet agreed to. the regional center or the service coordinator are not supporting you. Say you've reached out many, many times and they are unable to support you. What would you do in any of those instances? Well, I would file a complaint. Yes, and then when you file a complaint, that form is called an appeals request. Where do you send that appeals request? To the Developmental Disabilities Department, where they review it and they decide how to fix it. Yes, they can decide how to resolve that, but they decide the process. The goal is to make you satisfied. It's really important that they address how to solve the issue. How they do that can possibly be going to the regional center leadership, going to supervisors, and explaining that you've been asking for a complaint form to fill out, or they can change the service coordinator. They can have different ideas on how to solve it. If mediation doesn't work and the regional center is not listening, then DDS will bring in a mediator to listen to both sides, your complaint and your concerns, as well as where the regional center is coming from, and try to find some middle ground. Sometimes that can go on for quite some time. And if they're not able to resolve in that mediation, then it can go to a hearing where both sides testify and they are able to find a resolution if it actually escalates to a hearing. So as a DeafPlus person, do you have to take all of the stuff from a service coordinator of changing their mind and doing things without your consent? You absolutely do not have to. You're able to file a complaint. Have you ever filed a complaint, Stephen? No, I have not yet ever filed a complaint. I've always had great service coordinators for a long time. If there's any issues, I just reach out and we're able to make some changes and make sure I'm comfortable and everybody's clear on what I need. But it's always been able to change to accommodate whatever needs I have. That's great. I'm happy that you've never had to go as far as filing a complaint, that you're assertive and able to reach out to your service coordinator. Sometimes people get frustrated and irritated and they don't want to address the people in the IPP. They just go home and vent to their housemates or their friends. Well, I wouldn't do that. I would talk directly to the social worker or the service coordinator. And if they don't listen, then I would just go forward with filing a complaint. Suppose a person is really scared about filing a complaint. If they're real uneasy about that, what would you do? Well, I would be able to get the form and tell them that all you got to do is fill it out and then send it off to DDS. But I'm talking about before they file a complaint. If you have a DeafPlus friend who has a service coordinator who's not listening to them or not attending to their needs and wants, and they're very frustrated, and they just went ahead and signed an IPP that they didn't agree with, what would you do with that friend? I would tell them to stand up and speak out and tell them that it's not right and they need to fix it. And if need be, we'd file a complaint, but they definitely need to stand up. If they need help, I would help them file a complaint against the regional center myself. Yes, you want to give support and advocate for that friend. You can always help them and be at their next meeting. Help them feel confident and safe and comfortable. Maybe even at the next IPP. And you can encourage them to speak up in the next IPP about the issues that they don't like. That sense of support will give them a greater sense of confidence to speak out about their rights. It might be able to be solved in that meeting. Maybe they don't even need to go as far as filing a complaint. But there are other types of reactions that can happen in that meeting. But if they're continually denied their services and supports, there are ways to solve that. If you can talk through a meeting, sometimes that's better than filing through a complaint and going through a process like that. So since you've never filed a complaint, that means you've had good supports and services. That's great that the regional center is doing their job. So now that we know about filing a complaint, let's move on to the next slide.
So Stephen, this is all you, your self-advocacy, and so far what that self-advocacy means. So that means basically you have the right, and that word co-opinion. Do you remember that, Stephen? Yeah, the word co, basically the word is opinion. I'm sorry, opinion. And basically what my options are. And basically I can go ahead and get a co-opinion. And Diane says to share what? Stephen says to share food, share your opinions. There's so many different things. Your thoughts, your beliefs. Diane says, yeah, exactly. How you feel. And Steven says, yeah, sharing how you feel, your feelings on, you have to go to the event, you want to come. Sure, let's go. Meeting up with other people. Diane says, yeah, if you remember, you had mentioned before, another time you had said, basically I'm so tired of the government. I've been having to go and basically protest. And Steven says, yeah, the reason I went and had done the protesting, it was about funding and needing basically the wage to be increased and trying the costs for disability and the activities that are involved with that, all of that in one, and just basically speaking up and going and protesting that. It was a committee meeting, and letting them know what my choices are and keeping that A-B plan and agreeing with it, and basically all the committees there to basically hear everyone's opinions, and then they make their decision to whether keep it or not. And if not, then we've got to basically continually protesting and until they basically take it and do it the right way. Diane says, right, basically you are continuing self-advocating for yourself, letting them know, I don't like this isn't right. And you continue that protesting. And it's also, you can kind of like go and join the committee, their government committee. It's basically, it means like a meeting for regional centers, for all their clients, they can kind of join into the meeting. And me as myself, DeafPlus person, some RCs can join into the committee, and basically it's a good way to talk and discuss about how regional centers can do improving. You could join general meetings like you were saying, protesting about certain issues. You can stand up, make comments and explain, hey, I don't, agree in this, I believe this, or this is how I feel. And you can go and express yourself. Or you can write letters and, call places and basically repeatedly talk to, higher government officials and let them know that you're self-advocating, basically, right? Steven says, yeah, that's correct. And Diane says, let's say I don't really want to be in front of a lot of people and I don't want the, attention. I don't want to be involved in the meeting or the committee. What do I do? Let's say I don't want to do that. Steven says you can always make a phone call and bother them through the phone lines and, get them agitated to get them to listen to your rights and listen to your needs and hear that you're self-advocating for yourself. And it's a way to get them to listen to it. Diane says, oh, okay. So what if they don't want to accept the phone calls? Then what? Steve says, that's a good question. I'm not sure what the next step is. Diane says, so, well, maybe, fine. If you don't want to take my calls, I'll fight for me and find someone to fight for me as well. I'm trying to self-advocate. Really, you're trying to self-advocate for me, for my group. You go and talk for yourself. Not really. You get the whole group and you're talking about my rights, our rights as the group, and you're basically going to advocate, and then it can go, oh, I see, it's really important. And Steven says, yeah, basically whoever else needs help and they've got to respect their rights, and I'm fighting for them too. Diane says, that's right, that is correct. Very good points. So we're going to go ahead to the next slide. So now we've arrived at that point where we can come to questions and answers. Does anybody have any questions about anything that was discussed? If there's other comments, if you want to sign, we can spotlight you so you can be spotlighted and ask your question. We do have interpreters that can do the signing as well. If you just want to do a public comment, or your thoughts on anything related to the video, or related to the message that we're portraying, questions about your rights, or any thoughts that you'd like to drop in, or you can throw your hand up and we can spotlight you. Anything you want to add?
So we'll put that up. That slide there, you can use your phone and scan the QR code and the link will come up for you, and that'll have a survey. Or you can leave any comments you have about the presentation, if you enjoyed it and what you liked about it. We really appreciate all of you joining us and participating. Thank you, Stephen, for your work in this. Stephen said it's great to be here. Yeah, I've really enjoyed seeing the audience participation in this as well. If you'd like to share what inspires you or how you grow to success, I'd love for anyone to turn on their cameras and they can share that, or we have about another 5 minutes left if you have any more questions. I did want to add before we leave, though, that Stephen mentioned about appointments, asking the doctor for an interpreting services, and have they ever told you to bring your own interpreter? That's a good question. Do you feel at your appointment it's okay for you to bring your own interpreter? No, that's not my responsibility. When I request interpreting services, the doctor has to book those services. It's their responsibility to get that. Yeah, and if you ever run into that, where you go back and forth with an entity about getting interpreting services, you can always call in NorCal to help you resolve that. Some doctors' offices don't know that it's their responsibility to provide interpreting services. Stephen's adding that, yeah, lots of parents sign, and so they think that they can use the parents for those as an interpreter. But sometimes that can lead to be embarrassing moments or an awkward situation. It's better to have a professional sign language interpreter. Then you can feel confident in the message and how that goes. What'd you say? Diane asked, can you talk a bit about I missed what you said about the parents. Stephen saying, yeah, sometimes doctors' offices want the parents to act as interpreters, but it's better to have a professional interpreter for those appointments. Diane said, excellent point. Yes, I don't want to miss out on those appointments because I don't necessarily want all those people in my life to know what's going on at my doctor's appointment. It's important to know that when you go to the doctor, oftentimes they will decide that you don't need an interpreter because your parents will be there. But the doctors end up only talking to your parents instead of you as the patient. They should be asking you. Oftentimes they leave the DeafPlus patient out of that conversation. And then all of a sudden the appointment's over. They can take your blood pressure or your temperature, but really that's the only interaction they have with you because the conversation goes between the doctor and the parent. They're so busy discussing the issues with the doctor. And that's important. Even if they do have those conversations, it's important to have an interpreter there to make that conversation accessible. Like you said, sometimes for an appointment, it can be uncomfortable depending on the topic. And you don't always want your parent there. You have a right to have an interpreter there. As an adult, you have that right. It's your decision. And Stephen's saying, yes, I can decide. It's my choice whether to have my parents in those appointments or not. If I feel comfortable with that, then it's fine. Or I can make an appointment on my own with an interpreter. Diane's asking, what about staff? Do you have, what do you think about staff going into the appointment with you? Stephen's saying, well, staff can. I would rather an ILS or SLS support staff member go there because they know me more than the supervisor. Staff is just there as an advocate for any needs on that. But an ILS or SLS staff member would know my history and make sure that everything runs smoothly. Yeah, can you talk a bit about what ILS is? That means Independent Living Services, right? And SLS is Supported Living Services, right? Some people might not know what those acronyms are. So it's important that we're clear about that. I just want to take a minute and do that. ILS means that you have the choice whether you have a staff member in with you or not. It's your right if you'd rather them not be there. But maybe other folks, other DeafPlus folks might want their staff member in the appointment with them. Again, all the doctors should be talking with the DeafPlus person as the patient. And if you don't know the answers, it's okay to defer or talk with a staff member or a support person that's with you. But when you go into the appointment, it's not okay for the medical staff to only talk to the support person and you just sit off to the side. They need to first attend to you and interact with you. And if they're not able to get the right answers from you, then they can talk with a support person. If you're struggling to answer them, you have the same rights just as anybody else to understand what goes on. Sometimes support staff will use pictures or gestures or mime to make sure that a DeafPlus person is involved in that appointment. There are lots of different creative ways to communicate to make sure that people are engaged. Are there any other comments or questions from the audience? Okay, so thank you all so much for coming. I hope you all have a wonderful day. And thank you again, Stephen. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Stephen said, thank you all.